So, no matter how well we flatten our board and ensure everything is as straight as possible when making our neck, there is going to be a little discrepancy in the frets simply because of the machining process of the frets when they're made. They could have some variances if you press harder on some frets than others, etc. There's a number of problems that can cause uneven frets. One way to find if you have uneven frets is this thing called a fret rocker. And it's not necessary for the step, but it's helpful, as you can put it over 3 frets and check if there's any sort of rocking action. And just a few that I've checked so far on this guitar seem to be pretty. There's one. They seem to be pretty good, but it's not perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and do a fret level, and then all the stuff that needs to follow a fret level to get back your crowns and make the frets pretty and whatnot. As always, first thing when dealing with the neck, straight edge, make sure it's flat. Okay, now I've gone ahead and done a couple things while you guys weren't watching. As you can see, I've taped up the fingerboard to protect it from any tooling marks. We spent a long time getting that really nice, so there's no point in marring that surface now. And I've also drawn Sharpie across the top of all the frets. And this is going to help me keep track of my leveling process. As you can see, I've also taped off my humbuckers and anything that my leveling tools may hit. Just because I'm doing it at this stage doesn't mean you have to. You can do this before finishing work, before final sanding. It doesn't really matter. And in the case of doing it before finishing work and sanding, it does give you less of a risk of marring some of your work. But like I said, in this guitar's case, this is when I'm doing it. I don't always do it now, so you can pick and choose when you want to do it. This is not a required step, but it is something that I like to do. And I'll essentially go down the fretboard using this tool. You essentially want to choose the side that bridges 3 frets so that when you rock it, and this is a precision edge milled tool, so it can pick up very slight differences in height. Essentially, I'm going to take it, pick the side that will only do 3 frets, and then I'm essentially going to try and rock it. It's hard to hear, but you can hear a little tiny shift. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little dot for a little tiny shift, and then if there's a lot, I will put a line. And although this isn't a 100% necessary step, because you do have the Sharpie on top of the frets to keep track of your leveling process, I do like to do this as an extra step just to let me know where I should focus, places to keep track of. Now that I know that there is an issue here, I'll come back to this one spot, especially after doing my leveling process, and it's just an added reassurance that I'm getting the work done. Also, I should probably mention that if you are going to do this step, levelness can change across the board, so I don't just check every fret. I'll check at the edge, the center, and the opposite edge. And there will sometimes be differences. As you can see, despite all the care that we took in making our board flat, there's a bunch of spots that have little tiny rocks and a couple that have significant rocks. I'll be keeping these in mind while doing the leveling. What we're going to be using for our fret leveling is a precision milled steel rod. I got mine from StewMac. Both sides are precision milled to be pretty much perfectly flat. And that's extremely important because of the requirements for strings. Stringed instruments, they require a very uniform flatness in the frets so that you don't have buzzing anywhere on your fretboard. I'm going to use 240 grit on one side, and sometimes I will use the 320 side as well, but usually the 240 gets everything I need done. And also keep in mind there's a reason why at this point I haven't folded the edges of the tape down. Tape will actually sometimes interact with the lacquer, and if you leave it on there for an hour or two plus, it may start to lift the lacquer. The solvents of the tape may react with it and cause finish problems. So I only fold those down at the very end when I need them out of the way. For this process, I don't. And essentially all I'm going to do is I'm going to be placing the bar down and running it, making sure I keep it flat. and you can see that the Sharpie is starting to be removed in some places, and while in others it's not. Some people say that you have to go one direction only. Some people say that you can put it on and move back and forth. I use a little bit of both. I don't feel that one way or the other is better or worse. Some people say that if you do the dual direction method that you'll bias a sanding to the center, and so you'll have a slightly concave board. I haven't found that to be the case, but with my methods it requires so little fret leveling that I'm usually not leveling for that long or taking off any significant amount. That said, if you may want to stick to the one direction method. Also, when using a rod like this, it's quite heavy, so you don't actually need to put any pressure. The weight of the rod actually does the work. I'm just literally sliding it along the surface. The longer the rod, the better, obviously, because it's going to ensure flatness. StewMac and other Lutherie supply companies also sell shorter ones that are a lot cheaper than this, and so a lot of people tend towards those. They work, but they just require, in my experience, those require a lot more patience and sometimes experience to use, because it is a lot easier to put a dip in one section with the smaller one than it is this one, because this is bridging such a long area. I'm going to keep going. We'll come back when everything's level. Okay, I've essentially finished up most of the leveling, and this is where having the fret rocker, despite it not being a necessity, is nice, because I can go back and check those points that were originally off. And I found that I need a little more work on the E side, and there's a little tiny bit of Sharpie left on this fret where one of the issues is that I can still see. However, it's not as good a telltale sign as the fret rocker. That said, the Sharpie would have told you that as well. It's just nice to have a way to double check and to feel it as well as see it. I'm going to go back and fix this one area by just going up the E side, obviously like before, just following essentially the path the strings would take, because our fretboard is tapered and we want it flat along the string path. Okay, and this is what our fretboard looks like now. As you can see, there may be some Sharpie left on the sides, and some places I've taken off more than others, but they all now have a distinct silver spot at the top. And that means that we are now leveled. One thing that not everybody does, but I like to do, is called fall away. It's essentially taking off more of the fret past where it meets the body, because essentially your truss rod will act on the neck between where the neck meets the body and the nut only. So you won't be putting any bow in the truss rod for this area. So some people like to put a little fall away, some people find it unnecessary. You can choose to or not, and you can always come back and put fall away if you find that you're hitting any buzzing problems in this area. But I like to do it just as a precaution and simply because I like it. So we're going to show you how to do that next. What we're going to do is we're going to put two or three levels of blue tape, 1, 2 frets out from where your neck meets the body, and we're going to level from there, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so now I have my 2 layers of tape, 2 frets out from where the neck meets the body, and essentially what that's going to do is it's going to raise so that it puts a differential amount of pressure down here. So you're not sanding anything up the neck, but you are sanding the frets down the neck. And we're going to do it just like we did the other process. And this is just going to take a little bit. You really don't have to put much into it. And that should be enough. We now have these flat surfaces, and that will mess with the intonation of each fret, because we want the string contacting at a single point on the fret, not over a distance. So what we're going to have to do is recrown the frets, essentially make them rounded again, so that when you press, it just contacts, the string contacts the fret at one spot. This is a recrowning file. They come in a lot of different varieties, sizes for different fret wires, and grits. This happens to be the diamond one from StewMac, It's 150 grit and 300 grit. I happen to not have needed the 150 grit yet, so I would recommend, unless you plan on doing a lot of fret leveling, which you shouldn't have to, I suggest using the 300. And essentially all we're going to do is pass it over the fret, and you'd have to go pretty intensely to mess up the level that you just did. We're essentially trying to get rid of the Sharpie marker again that I put back on each of the frets, so that will tell us that we have a rounded surface again. As you can see, I folded down the edges of the tape because I am going to have to get in and do some of these up, and the tape would get in the way. So that essentially just means that from now forward, take about an hour to 2 hours. You shouldn't need that much time, but that's just to say, don't leave this with the tape on it and come back a couple hours later or tomorrow to finish up your work. You need to do it now. And I'm just going to do a couple of these so you can watch and get the feel for how fast and what all you need to do. And there you go. That's all it took. And I have one more thing I'm going to do with this file. I'm just going to break these corners a tiny bit, just to round them over a bit. We'll finish that round over in a little while. Okay, I've now gone through and recrowned all my frets, so there is no Sharpie on the top. As you can see, on some of them there may be some Sharpie still on the sides and whatnot. That's fine. What you're doing is removing the Sharpie from the top. And this is one thing that actually kind of irked me when I first was learning this process, because I thought, if I'm recrowning the fret, how could there be Sharpie left on the side? And also another thing that bugged me is it seemed like just one or two swipes, and if my leveling was good, now I know, then the Sharpie would all be gone. I thought there's no way it's possibly doing it this quickly, or it's recrowning and leaving stuff on the side. That's not the case. And one of the things that has to do with this is, if they made a file for every single different type of fret wire, you would have to buy tons of files just to get anything done, especially as a repair person. As a builder, you could theoretically just pick one wire and build with only that. Not that that's the best option, but you could. So what they've done is they've essentially made a file that crowns it, but might not necessarily bring all different fret wire in its range of use back to a perfect circle, and that would explain why it's leaving a little Sharpie on the sides and why it goes fast. Because yes, it is crowning. No, it may not bring it back to a perfect semicircle. And if you really want to ease your mind on that, go ahead and install a piece of fret wire into a scrap. Really grind it down, like take off several thousandths, and then try recrowning it with the Sharpie method. And you'll see that, yes, on stuff that is very ground, it will take more than just a couple swipes, and you will see the line go from a thick Sharpie down the center to something thinner, 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 and finally it'll disappear. As you can see, there's a tiny little piece of that line right in there left. And if you test on a more drastic subject, you'll be able to see that better, and at least with me, that gained me some confidence in my fretwork. It may work for you, or maybe you're already comfortable with it, but fretwork does take some time. Alright, last step in the actual grinding and whatnot shaping of frets is to take a file with a ground edge so that it's not going to mar your surface. It's basically any file. At home I use a triangle file. I borrowed this from a friend of mine for this video because it's a nice StewMac product, but a triangle file works as well. I don't have this at home. So essentially one non-abrasive edge and then two abrasive edges. And essentially all you're going to go around and do is just cut these little corners. Just go 1, 2, and do the other side. 1, 2. That's it. And you can feel that any burring and whatnot is gone. The next step in fretwork, in my opinion, is especially grueling and time-consuming and just not fun. And as you guessed it, it's sanding. What we're essentially going to do is we're going to have to bring these frets back up to a nice polish, because the 240 that we used on the beam and then the 300 grit that we used to recrown have put lots of scratches in our fret wire. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 400, 800, and 1200 sandpaper and literally go through each of these frets and sand them up. We're not top too much, and you don't have to do that much work, but it does need to get done. And we're going to go through and do that for both sides of every single fret with 400, 800, 1200, and then we're going to rub them out with steel wool. Alright, after you've gone through all the grits that I mentioned and Quado steel wool, it's now time to buff the frets out. They're a nice satin now, and actually some people like the satin look, especially if you don't have a shiny board. If you got a matte board. If you want to polish, I use a Dremel with a little polishing pad. Also, set it up on your buffer or on a grinder, set up a small buffing wheel. The problem with using your normal buffer, like we use with the finish, on frets is that metal, when polished, makes the buffing wheel go black, and then it won't do finish because it will mess with your finishing. So I like to keep the two separate. That's why I use the Dremel. And there you go. After all the frets have been buffed out nicely, I like to take some naphtha and clean them off because, like I said, polishing frets makes this black substance. I like to get that off the frets before I remove the tape. Once you're done, go ahead and remove it. They're done.